do. And it was a different level of harnessing a human-animal relationship that gave them a military advantage that could not be copied, right? It could be emulated, but they were never as good, right? That's why they always hired these people. They hired mercenaries from these areas because they were incomparable, right? So the combination of people who were shooting bows and arrows from the time they were toddlers, who were riding from the time they were toddlers, who rode all the time. I mean, the Huns were bow-legged, the Romans said, because they were never out. They ate, slept, everything in the saddle. That creates something that is difficult to copy. And it gave them a military advantage. I enjoy reading actually about when that military advantage ended. So 17th and 18th century, when the Chinese on one flank and the Russians on the other are beginning to use firearms and stuff to break this military power of these various Khans. The Mongols were simply the most dominating and most successful of the confederacies. But if you break it down, they really formed the nucleus at the top of the pyramid, of the apex of the food chain. And a lot of the people that were known as Mongols were really lots of other tribes, non-Mongolian tribes, that when the Mongols conquer you, after they killed a lot of you, they incorporated you into their confederacy. And often made you go first. You're going to fight somebody, we're going to make these people go out in front and suck up all the arrows before we go in and finish the job. So to me, and I guess a fan of the Mongols would say that the difference and what made the Mongols different wasn't the weapon system or the fighting or the warriors or the armor or anything. It was Genghis Khan. And if you go look at the other really dangerous, from the outside world's perspective, dangerous steppe nomadic confederacies from past history was always when some great leader emerged that could unite the tribes. And you see the same thing in Native American history to a degree too. You had people like Attila, right? Or there's one called Tumen. You go back in history, and these people make the history books because they caused an enormous amount of trouble for their settled neighbors that normally, I mean, Chinese, Byzantine, and Persian approaches to the steppe people were always the same. They would pick out tribes to be friendly with. They would give them money, gifts, hire them, and they would use them against the other tribes. And generally, Byzantine, especially in Chinese diplomatic history, was all about keeping these tribes separated. Don't let them form confederations of large numbers of them, because then they're unstoppable. Attila was a perfect example. The Huns were the Turks, another large confederacy of these people, and they were devastating when they could unite. So the diplomatic policy was don't let them. That's what made the Mongols different, is Genghis Khan united them. And then unlike most of the tribal confederacies, they were able to hold it together for a few generations.
What do you think makes a great leader? Maybe if you have other examples throughout history. And great, again, let's use that term loosely.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a definition.
Great uniter of whether it's evil or good, it doesn't matter. Is there somebody who stands out to you, Alexander the Great? So we're talking about military or ideologies. Some people bring up FDR or I mean, it could be the founding fathers of this country, or we can go to was he man of the century up there, Hitler of the 20th century, and Stalin, and these people had really amassed the amount of power that probably has never been seen in the history of the world. Is there somebody who stands out to you by way of trying to define what makes a great uniter, great leader in one man or a woman maybe in the future?
It's an interesting question, and one I've thought a lot about, because let's take Alexander the Great as an example, because Alexander fascinated the world of his time, ever since. People have been fascinated with the guy. But Alexander was a hereditary monarch, right?
Yeah.
He was handed the kingdom.
Which is fascinating.
Right, but he did not need to rise from nothing to get that job. In fact, he reminds me of a lot of other leaders, Frederick the Great, for example. in Prussia. These are people who inherited the greatest army of their day. Alexander, unless he was an imbecile, was going to be great no matter what. Because, I mean, if you inherit the Wehrmacht, you're going to be able to do something with it, right? Alexander's father may have been greater. Philip II was the guy who literally did create a strong kingdom from a disjointed group of people that were continually beset by their neighbors. He's the one that reformed that army, took things that he had learned from other Greek leaders like the Theban leader Epaminondas, and then laboriously over his lifetime stabilized the frontiers, built this system. He lost an eye doing it. His leg was made lame. I mean, this was a man who looked like he built the empire and led from the front ranks. I mean, and then who may have been killed by his son. We don't know who assassinated Philip, but then handed the greatest army the world had ever seen to his son, who then did great things with it. You see this pattern many times. So in my mind, I'm not sure Alexander really can be that great when you compare him to people who arose from nothing. So the difference between what we would call in the United States the self-made man or the one who inherits a fortune. There's an old line that, it's a slur, but it's about rich people. And it's like he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple, right? Yeah. Philip was born at home plate and he had to hit. Alexander started on third base. And so I try to draw a distinction between them. Genghis Khan is tough because there's two traditions. The tradition that we grew up with here in the United States and that I grew up learning was that he was a self-made man. Mm-hmm. But there is a tradition, and it may be one of those things that's put after the fact because a long time ago, whether or not you had blue blood in your veins was an important distinction. Mm-hmm. And so the distinction that you'll often hear from Mongolian history is that this was a nobleman who had been deprived of his inheritance, so he was a blue blood anyway. I don't know which is true. There's certainly, when you look at a Genghis Khan, though, you have to go, that is a wicked amount of things to have achieved. He's very impressive as a figure. Attila's very impressive as a figure. Hitler's an interesting figure. He's one of those people, because, the more you study about Hitler, the more you wonder where the defining moment was. Because if you look at his life, Hitler was a relatively common soldier in the First World War. He was brave. He got some decorations. In fact, the highest decoration he got in the First World War was given to him by a Jewish officer. And it was, he often didn't talk about that decoration, even though it was the more prestigious one, because it would open up a whole can of worms you didn't want to get into. But Hitler's, if you said who was Hitler today, one of the top things you're going to say is he was an anti-Semite. Well, then you have to draw a distinction between general, regular anti-Semitism that was pretty common in the era and something that was a rabid level of anti-Semitism. But Hitler didn't seem to show a rabid level of anti-Semitism until after or at the very end of the First World War. So if this is a defining part of this person's character, and much of what we consider to be his evil stems from that, what happened to this guy when he's an adult, right? He's already fought in the war. To change him so, it's almost like there was always a movie theme. Somebody gets hit by something on the head and their whole personality changes, right? It almost seems something like that. So I don't think I call that necessarily a great leader. To me, the interesting thing about Hitler is what the hell happened to a nondescript person who didn't really impress anybody with his skills. And then in the 1920s is all of a sudden, as you said, sort of the man of the hour, right? Yeah. So that to me is kind of fascinating. I have this feeling that Genghis Khan, and we don't really know, was an impressive human being from the get-go. And then he was raised in this environment with pressure on all sides. So you start with this diamond and then you polish it and you harden it his whole life. Hitler seems to be a very unimpressive gemstone most of his life. And then all of a sudden, so I don't think I can label great leaders. And I'm always fascinated by that idea that and I'm trying to remember who the quote was by, that great men, Lord Acton. So great men are often not good men. And that in order to be great, you would have to jettison many of the moral qualities that we normally would consider a Jesus or a Gandhi or, the Martin. I mean, these qualities that one looks at as the good, upstanding moral qualities that we should all aspire to as examples